I found out my sister and husband have been having an affair for months, and now my whole family is trying to sweep it under the rug like it never happened. When I found out my husband and my sister had been sleeping together, it felt like my entire world came crashing down. I'm 34 years old, my husband Jake is 35, and my sister Emma is 28. Emma has always been my best friend, someone I could confide in about everything. Growing up, we were inseparable, and even after I got married, she stayed close to us. She would come over frequently, even babysitting our kids when Jake and I needed some time alone. Never in a million years did I think she and Jake could be betraying me in this way. It all started with little things that, at first, didn't seem like red flags. Jake had been working late more than usual, and Emma started dropping by the house less frequently. I assumed they were both just busy. Emma with her job, and Jake with work deadlines. But then Jake began to act distant, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He barely spoke to me anymore, always distracted, always on his phone. I asked him if something was wrong, but he shrugged it off, saying it was just stress from work. I wanted to believe him, but a nagging feeling in my gut told me there was more to it. One night, while Jake was in the shower, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. Normally, I wouldn't check his phone. I've always trusted him. But this time, something compelled me to look. The message was from Emma, and my stomach dropped as I read the preview. "Can't wait to see you again." I froze. My heart pounded in my chest as I unlocked his phone and opened the conversation. What I found made my blood run cold. There were months' worth of messages between Jake and Emma, and they weren't just friendly chats. They were intimate, flirty, and clearly secretive. It was obvious that they had been seeing each other behind my back. I felt like I was going to throw up. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My own sister, someone I loved and trusted more than anyone, had been sneaking around with my husband. I kept scrolling, my hands shaking, reading texts about secret meetups, confessions of love, and even plans they had made while I was at work or with the kids. How had I not seen this? How long had this been going on? I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as I realized the full extent of their betrayal. This wasn't just a fling. This had been going on for months. When Jake came out of the shower, I confronted him immediately. He saw his phone in my hand and knew exactly what was happening. "What is this?" I asked, my voice trembling with fury and hurt. He didn't even try to deny it. He just stood there, silent, guilt all over his face. "How could you do this to me, with my sister?" I shouted, my voice breaking. He tried to explain, mumbling something about how they never meant for it to happen, that it just got out of hand. But his words were empty. There was no excuse for what they had done. I demanded to know how long it had been going on. He admitted it had been months, months of sneaking around behind my back, lying to my face, and betraying our marriage. I couldn't believe it. The man I had trusted with my heart, the father of my children, had been cheating on me with my own sister. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. I was so angry, so hurt, I could barely form coherent thoughts. All I could do was scream at him, demanding to know why, how, what on earth could have driven them to do this to me. Jake's excuses made no sense. He kept saying it just happened, that he and Emma had connected in ways they didn't expect. But how could something like this just happen? This wasn't a one-time mistake. This was months of planning, months of lies, months of looking me in the eye and pretending everything was fine while they were sneaking around behind my back. I couldn't take it anymore. I told him to pack his things and leave. I couldn't even stand to look at him. He tried to beg for forgiveness, but I wasn't ready to listen. After Jake left, I called Emma. My hands were shaking as I dialed her number, and when she answered, I couldn't hold back. "How could you do this to me?" I yelled before she even had a chance to say hello. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then finally, she spoke, her voice small and shaky. "I'm so sorry," she said, starting to cry. "I never meant for it to happen." Her words only made me angrier. "You didn't mean for it to happen? You've been sleeping with my husband for months, Emma. How could you do this to your own sister?" She kept apologizing, saying it was a mistake, that it wasn't supposed to go this far, but nothing she said made it better. Nothing could undo the damage they had caused. "You betrayed me," I said, my voice shaking with emotion. "I trusted you. I loved you. And you threw it all away for what? For him?" Emma was sobbing at this point, but I didn't care. Her tears didn't change the fact that she had wrecked my life. I hung up on her, unable to listen to her excuses any longer. I felt like my heart had been ripped out of my chest. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, all I could see were images of Jake and Emma together. I replayed every interaction we'd had over the last few months in my head. wondering how I could have missed the signs. How could I have been so blind? How long had this been going on right under my nose? The pain was unbearable, like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. I didn't know how to move forward. I didn't even know how to breathe. Eventually, I told my parents what had happened. I was still in shock, hoping they would offer me some kind of support, some comfort. But instead of the outrage I expected, I was met with hesitation. My mom's first response wasn't to comfort me. Instead, she said, "Maybe we should keep this within the family. No need to make things worse." I stared at her, speechless. "Worse?" I asked, my voice rising in disbelief. "My husband and my sister have been having an affair for months, and you think the problem is me talking about it?" My dad chimed in, trying to play the role of the peacemaker. "Look, it's a terrible situation, but we need to think about the bigger picture. You and Jake have a family together. Maybe you can work things out. And Emma, well, she's your sister. Family is family. Maybe you two can fix this." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Fix this?" I asked, incredulous. "They've been lying to me for months, and you want me to sweep it under the rug?" My parents looked uncomfortable, like they didn't want to deal with the fallout of what had happened. I felt completely betrayed, not just by Jake and Emma, but now by my parents too. They were more concerned with keeping the peace than with the fact that their daughter's marriage had just been destroyed. "You can't be serious," I said, my voice breaking. "You expect me to just forgive them and move on." But my mom just sighed. "We've been through worse as a family. We can get through this too, but you have to be willing to forgive." I couldn't believe it. My entire world had been torn apart, and my parents were acting like it was something I could just brush aside. The days that followed were unbearable. I stopped answering Emma's calls and texts. I didn't want to hear her excuses, didn't want to deal with her apologies. I couldn't even look at Jake. He tried to come over a few times to talk, to beg for another chance, but I wasn't ready to hear it. How could I? The trust was gone. My marriage was shattered. And worst of all, my family was acting like I was the one being unreasonable for not wanting to forgive them. I felt more alone than I ever had in my life. Emma wouldn't stop trying to reach out. She sent me long, emotional texts, apologizing over and over again, telling me how much she regretted everything, how much she missed me, how sorry she was. But every time I saw her name pop up on my phone, it felt like a punch to the gut. How could I ever forgive her? How could I ever trust her again? She wasn't just my sister. She was someone I had confided in, someone I thought would always have my back, and now she had destroyed everything. Jake wasn't much better. He kept insisting that we should go to counseling, that we could work through this, that we could somehow salvage our marriage. "I love you," he kept saying, as if those words could fix anything. I made a mistake, but I love you. But how could he love me and betray me like this? How could he claim to care about our family while sneaking around with Emma behind my back? His words felt hollow, meaningless. The damage had been done, and no amount of therapy or apologies could undo it. Eventually, I made the decision to file for divorce. It wasn't an easy choice, but it was the only one that made sense. How could I stay in a marriage where trust no longer existed? How could I rebuild a life with someone who had lied to me for months? I couldn't. Jake was devastated when I told him, but I didn't care. He had made his bed, and now he had to lie in it. "I can't do this anymore," I told him. "You destroyed us. I'm done." It felt final, but it also felt necessary. When I told my parents that I was divorcing Jake, they weren't thrilled. My mom tried to convince me to hold off, saying that divorce was too final and that I should give it more time. My dad just looked disappointed. "We don't want this to tear the family apart," he said. It was infuriating. "This already tore the family apart," I shouted. "Jake and Emma tore it apart, not me. I'm just trying to survive." But they didn't seem to get it. They kept urging me to forgive, to try and work things out, to keep the family together. The divorce process was grueling, not just emotionally, but because of the constant pressure from my family. They didn't understand why I couldn't just let it go. "People make mistakes," my mom kept saying. "Marriage is hard. You can't just give up when things get difficult." But this wasn't just a mistake. This was months of betrayal, months of lies. There was no coming back from that. No matter how much they tried to convince me otherwise, I knew in my heart that my marriage was over. Jake had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Emma, for her part, kept trying to insert herself into my life. She sent more apologies, more texts, even tried to show up at my house once to talk. But I couldn't deal with her. I told her to stay away, told her that I needed space, but she didn't seem to understand. My parents kept pushing me to talk to her, to reconcile, but I wasn't ready. Maybe I'd never be ready. How could I possibly have a relationship with her after everything she had done? The pain was still too raw, too overwhelming. Friends and coworkers started noticing that something was wrong. I hadn't told many people about what had happened, just a few close friends, but the weight of the situation was written all over my face. People kept asking if I was okay, if something was wrong, and eventually, I started telling the truth. My husband had an affair, I would say quietly, and every time the reaction was the same: shock, disbelief. But when I added that it was with my sister, their jaws dropped. "Your sister?" They would ask, horrified. "How could she do that to you?" It felt good to finally talk about it with people who weren't trying to force me to forgive and forget. My friends supported me, reassured me that I wasn't overreacting, that I had every right to be furious. They understood the gravity of the betrayal in a way that my family didn't seem to. It was validating to have someone on my side, to have someone who didn't expect me to sweep it under the rug. "You don't owe them anything," one friend told me. "You need to do what's best for you." But no matter how much support I got from my friends, the pain was still there, gnawing away at me day after day. The betrayal felt like a wound that would never heal. I tried to focus on other things, my job, my kids, anything to distract myself, but it was always in the back of my mind. Every time my phone buzzed, I would brace myself, afraid it would be another message from Emma or Jake, begging for forgiveness. I couldn't escape it. It was like a cloud hanging over me, suffocating me. I started going to therapy, hoping it would help me process everything that had happened. My therapist was kind, patient, and understanding. She helped me realize that it was okay to feel angry, that it was okay to take time to heal. But even with her help, it felt like an impossible task. How do you move on from something like this? How do you rebuild your life after the two people you trusted most have completely shattered it? I didn't have any answers, and that scared me. I didn't know if I would ever be okay again. The divorce was finalized a few months later. It felt surreal, like I was living someone else's life. I had never imagined myself getting divorced, especially not under these circumstances. But here I was, a single mom, trying to piece my life back together after my marriage had imploded. It wasn't just the end of my relationship with Jake, it was the end of the future I had imagined for us. We had built a life together, had kids together, and now all of that was gone. It felt like I was mourning the death of something precious. In the months that followed, I tried to distance myself from my family. I couldn't deal with their constant pressure to forgive Emma, to try and fix things with her. I wasn't ready to forgive, and I didn't know if I ever would be. My parents didn't understand that. They kept inviting both me and Emma to family events, acting like everything was normal. But nothing was normal anymore. I couldn't sit across the table from her and pretend that she hadn't destroyed my life. I couldn't pretend that everything was fine. One day, my mom called and asked me to come to a family dinner. "Emma will be there," she said, her voice hopeful. "It would be good for you two to talk." I snapped. "Why are you always pushing me to forgive her?" I shouted. "She ruined my marriage. She slept with my husband. How can you expect me to just get over that?" My mom was quiet for a moment, then she sighed. "Because she's your sister," she said, "and family is forever. No matter what she did, she's still your sister." I hung up the phone, shaking with anger. How could my mom not see that Emma had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed? How could she act like blood was all that mattered, like the bond of family meant I had to forgive anything and everything? I didn't owe Emma forgiveness. I didn't owe her anything. She had made her choice, and now she had to live with the consequences. I wasn't going to pretend like everything was okay just to keep the peace in the family. I couldn't. The months dragged on, and slowly I started to rebuild my life. I threw myself into my work, focused on my kids, and tried to create a new normal for myself. It wasn't easy, and the pain was still there, but little by little, I began to feel like I could breathe again. I started going out with friends more, taking up hobbies I had neglected during my marriage, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was living for myself. It was liberating in a way I hadn't expected. I kept Emma and Jake out of my life as much as possible. I still saw them at the occasional family gathering, but I avoided them as much as I could. My parents continued to push for reconciliation, but I wasn't interested. Maybe one day I would be ready to talk to Emma, but that day hadn't come yet. The wound was still too fresh, the betrayal too deep. I needed time to heal, and I wasn't going to rush that process just to make everyone else feel more comfortable. One day, out of the blue, Emma showed up at my house. I was furious. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice cold. She stood on my doorstep, tears streaming down her face, begging me to hear her out. "I just want to apologize," she said. I've tried texting, calling, but you won't respond. Please just let me talk to you. I wanted to slam the door in her face, but something stopped me. Maybe I was tired of running from this, or maybe I just needed to hear her say it in person. I let her inside, and we sat down in the living room. Emma was crying, but I felt numb. "I'm so sorry," she said again. "I never meant to hurt you. I don't know what I was thinking. It was the biggest mistake of my life, and I would do anything to take it back." Her words didn't move me. I had heard it all before, in texts, in voicemails. But now, face to face, I could see the pain in her eyes, the regret. It didn't change what she had done, but for the first time, I saw how broken she was too. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you," I said quietly, finally breaking my silence. "What you did destroyed my life. You took everything from me. How do you expect me to just move past that?" Emma nodded, her eyes full of tears. "I don't expect you to," she said softly. "I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. I've been living with this guilt every day, and it's killing me. I don't know how to fix it, but I needed you to hear it from me, face to face." We sat in silence for a long time after that. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to scream at her, to tell her that her apologies didn't mean anything, that she had wrecked my life and nothing could change that. But another part of me was exhausted. I didn't have the energy to keep hating her. I didn't know what forgiveness looked like, but I knew that holding on to this anger was tearing me apart too. I wasn't ready to forgive her, but I also wasn't ready to carry this burden any longer. "I need time," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you, but I need time to figure that out." Emma nodded, tears still falling down her face. "I understand," she said. "I'll give you all the time you need. I just want you to know that I love you, and I'll be here whenever you're ready." With that, she left, and I sat there alone, feeling a strange sense of relief. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a step forward, one small step toward healing. In the weeks that followed, I continued to focus on myself and my kids. I stopped worrying so much about what my family thought, stopped letting their pressure get to me. This was my journey, my healing process, and I wasn't going to rush it for anyone. I still didn't know if I could ever forgive Emma, but I was starting to accept that it was okay not to have all the answers. Healing wasn't linear, and I was learning to take it one day at a time. My parents eventually backed off, realizing that I wasn't going to be pushed into reconciliation before I was ready. I still saw them at family events, but I kept my distance. I needed space to heal, and they were finally starting to respect that. Emma stayed out of my life, honoring my request for time and space. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Slowly but surely, I was reclaiming my life, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. Looking back, I realized that this betrayal had changed me in ways I hadn't expected. It had shattered my trust, yes, but it had also forced me to grow. I had learned to stand up for myself, to set boundaries, and to prioritize my own well-being. I wasn't the same person I was before all of this happened, but I was stronger now. And that was something I could hold on to, even when everything else felt uncertain. One day, I might be ready to forgive Emma. One day, I might be able to sit across from her at a family dinner and not feel the weight of what she did. But that day wasn't today. For now, I was focused on healing, on building a new life for myself and my kids. The road ahead was long, but I knew I was strong enough to walk it. I didn't need anyone's approval or forgiveness to move forward. I just needed to take it one step at a time. As for Jake, I had no interest in ever reconciling with him. Our marriage was over, and I was finally at peace with that. He had made his choices, and now I was making mine. I was moving on, building a life without him, and I knew I was better off for it. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. And as I looked toward the future, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope.